All right, welcome everyone to this webinar on evidence-based change. Today we're going to discuss a couple of tools that come from behavioral science and neuropsychology, and that can be applied quite effectively to the world of change management. And the reason for this is that change in organizations, but also change in societal context, is very dependent on human behavior. The human actors that are making decisions, that are being driven by motivation, are the key components to successful change. And understanding what drives these humans and what drives their motivation can make a huge difference in whether your change attempts will be successful or not. So that being said, we're going to dive right into it. It's going to be a very practical webinar. We're going to share a lot of tools, a lot of frameworks. And you can ask questions along the way. You can use the chat as well. And of course, we're always available for questions afterwards as well. Okay, so shortly about me. My name is Jordanov. I'm a cognitive neuropsychologist. And what that means is that I translate insights from behavioral science and psychology and neuroscience to practical solutions for the clients that we work with. And these are all driven by the desire to positively influence behavior. We know that humans play a huge role in any type of societal or organizational effort, and being able to understand what drives them and what motivates them and how to interact with them and how to create more positive changes and experiences is key for that. I work at Neurofied, a behavioral change company, also called a behavioral change consultancy. And what we do is we work with clients to make sure that they can develop and grow and change with insights from these human sciences like psychology and neuroscience. And what we found was that it has a quite broad application area. So we work in change management purposes. We also work with customer journeys, with growth mindset, with diversity and inclusion. Everywhere where there is behavioral change, we're also active. And today we're going to narrow that scope a little bit and really look at change management and interventions that you can use as a change manager. So the goal would be, and the goal is definitely not limited to change managers only. This is for every professional that deals with humans and that deals with change on a daily basis. So we're going to look at the role of biases, of these mental shortcuts that might be blocking change or that might be barriers to change. We're going to look at frameworks and example cases that overarch change and that can be used in change management and that are informed by these sciences about the brain and behavior. And we're going to go over a lot of actionable techniques and interventions, things that you can start experimenting with right away, that you can start applying in your own context and that you can make into your own ways of working and that you can work into your benefit because they're informed by the way that we think and behave. So I want to dive into this first piece, which is about cognitive biases. Now, I'm sure that some of you have heard of cognitive biases or unconscious bias before. In different contexts. And in change management, it's also definitely a problem because our brain, the human brain, which has been going through evolution for many thousands and thousands of years, is actually hardwired to resist change. This is logical when you think about it, because way back when we used to live on the steppe in the savannah, our ancestors, and I'm talking thousands of years ago, were used to environments that changed very little. And actually, when there was a big change, this change carries a huge risk with it as well. Everything that you're used to, the people that you're used to, the environment that you used to feel safe, especially these thousands and thousands of years back. And everything that's novel or new might be a threat, might be something that gets in the way of us surviving as a species, of us reproducing. So over these thousands and thousands of years, our brain learned to resist change because change is associated with risk and is associated with loss. This is, of course, a bit of a hassle when we're talking about today's organizational world in which changes are happening so fast, in which changing and innovating is the only way to win. It's the only way to move forward. And yet we are unconsciously hardwired to resist it. Now, if you talk about this in terms of cognitive psychology, we talk about cognitive biases. So the ways in which our brains resist change are quite predictable. They're actually patterns. And these patterns are called cognitive biases. So when we're able to identify these patterns in behavior, these cognitive biases, it becomes a lot easier for us to see where the problems in our change programs are, where the hassles and barriers in the behavior change are, and how to design around that, how to become better change managers. So there are many cognitive biases, over 300. And this is a very good visual that gives you an idea of the sheer quantity of biases. The good thing is you do not have to know them all by name. Actually, you don't even have to know any of them by name to work around them, to be better at change and be informed by the science that dictates this. And we'll go into that a little bit deeper, but I did want to show you a little bit of how bias operates and how many biases there are. So these are all mental shortcuts that our brain learned in thousands and thousands of years of evolution. And I'll give you some examples in just a bit. And these are all capable of getting in the way of change. But if we design and if we create a context for our people, employees, that they're able to engage with in a more positive way, then these biases can also work in our favor. So it's about understanding the way that the mind works, all these patterns, all these biases, and being able to apply that in the way in which we plan change, in which we design change, in which we integrate change interventions. So to make this a bit more concrete, bias, what does that look like in practice? What does that look like in change management practice? What we see is that even the best change professionals, and not just change professionals, we see this in every manager, in every leader, in every strategic planner, we see that almost all of them sometimes underscope resource or capital requirements. So how much time do we need? How much resources do we need? What budget is needed for this change? It's always underscoped in some cases. And this is called the planning fallacy. We're not always able to accurately plan for these things. Also, when we notice that a project is not performing as well as we thought it would be, it's failing, a lot of managers tend to double down on it because they already invested so much time, they already invested so much resources, and they also invested their reputation. This is called the sunk cost fallacy, very common bias. Also, sometimes we assume that small risks are zero risk. So the cases like that will not happen to us, or this project is going to be safe, we're not going to have huge cost overruns because the chances are minimal. But small risks are not zero risks, and that black swan event can still happen. So this is called the zero risk bias, and it's another common phenomena that brings us as managers, as change planners astray. And this is a great example of how bias affects our judgment there. And of course, we see bias not just in these change managers or change professionals, we see them everywhere. We see them in all the employees that need to undergo another transition, a digital transformation, another big change. We have reactants, we don't want to do all these things because they feel threatening to our autonomy, to our ways of working. This is called the reactance bias. We'd rather stick to what we know. We'd rather stick to the tool that we've been using for many years. We'd rather keep working with the team that we've been working with for the past 6 months than move on to a next one. This is called the status quo bias. We also sometimes see that our old habits and behaviors are so powerful that even when we have been onboarded on the new HR tool or whatever it is, and we've learned the new ways of working, we still regress and we go back to those old ways of working because that is what's being etched into our brain a lot heavier. So this is called the regression bias. And again, you don't have to remember any of these names. You just need to understand that there are many ways in which cognitive bias can get in the way of change. You need to understand that there's a huge scope of how this can happen, and leave the rest of the complicated terminology to the psychologists because you don't actually need that to find solutions. So before we dive into those solutions, I would want to summarize the problem with biases in change. They're hardwired and subconscious. So it's not like we're aware of our bias, and it's not like we can do anything about it because it's just the way that our brains are wired. And with doing anything about it, I mean on the individual level. We cannot take the bias out of our own brains. Biases are also not observable or measurable because they take place inside the mind and they manifest in organizations. So only when we see their consequences in, for example, meetings that are being run poorly, planning that is not holding up to its standards, or execution that is being done subpar, that is when we can see the outcome of bias, but we cannot measure bias directly. Also, and that's the biggest problem, bias is also amplified by organizational factors. Now, probably some of you have heard of groupthink, the phenomenon where we value consensus and being in agreement with each other over having the real conversation. And this is an innate tendency that we all have. But as soon as we're in a meeting and a senior person speaks up and they state their opinion on a matter, and we see that a lot of the other attendees of this meeting tend to align with her perspective, because they value consensus. They value being seen as like-minded by their peers and by their supervisors. So this is when a phenomenon like groupthink actually seeps into an organizational process and makes things even worse. So that's the problem with biases. How do we deal with it? Well, we don't deal with it by learning all the 300 biases by name and knowing exactly what they do. We also can't really take the bias out of people. And I know that there are many billions spent on unconscious bias training and sensitivity training and implicit association trainings in organizations and diversity trainings as well. And this is, of course, a good thing. But the data shows that these types of trainings usually don't lead to big differences in bias in organizations. So the outcome of these trainings are often subpar. We need more. We don't just need training, we also need systemic solutions. And this is when we get to not taking biases out of people, but taking biases out of processes. When we go from one brain to multiple brains, so one person to multiple people in a meeting room, in an organization, in a team, there are actually many things that we can do in terms of the way that they interact with each other, in terms of dynamics, in terms of process, in terms of system, many things that we can do to eliminate bias or to at least correct for bias. And this sounds very intense, maybe even a bit threatening, but this can actually be very fun. And that's what we're gonna dive into right now. So a successful change requires an approach that prioritizes people and the way that they think. So it needs to be behaviorally informed and human-centered. It needs to actively de-bias the processes and systems around that change. And it needs to set an organization up for sustainable and lasting change. So we don't need to just aim at short-term change and getting things done and going from change to business as usual. We need to think about change as a continuum, a constant, and embrace change and also interact with change in such a way that sets our organization up to be agile, to be adaptive, and to be resilient. So that's a huge mouthful. And of course, you're not gonna do this from one day to another, but there are many handy tools and tactics and techniques that you can use to get to this ideal point of being like a change agile company step by step. I want to introduce you to a framework that has been thoroughly researched by academics as well as in-field professionals at the Neuro Leadership Institute in the United States. And they identified a framework that lends itself very well for behavioral and cultural change. And behavioral and cultural change have a lot of shared interests, and they mainly center around human behavior. So let's dive into this framework. By knowing this framework, it's going to make it a lot easier for you to apply tactics and interventions, and to also structure the way in which you apply your change management toolkit as a manager. So this framework, priorities, habits, systems, is all about being able to align priorities, actionable strategies that are clear that you're going to use for change, with habits. Those are behaviors that are easy and scalable, that can really embody change and bring change into the organization at scale. And also systems, the processes and policies, so the environment around those habits, around the people that create those behaviors. So priorities, habits, systems need to be continuously aligned. And I know that this sounds very abstract and vague because it's a very high level framework, but we're going to go over an example that's going to make it a bit clearer for you. So we have organization X, and this organization noticed that extrovert employees are way more likely to be promoted throughout the company than introvert employees, and they want to change this. Now you immediately see that there is a lot of bias here. There's bias for people, bias towards extrovert people. There might be in-group favoritism. You know, maybe the management is extrovert and only likes people more that are also extrovert. There might be a halo effect. People that exhibit very extravagant behavior and that are very outgoing might be perceived as more positive. Again, we're not going to get to the solution by just listing a bunch of biases. Rather, we want to identify the priorities, habits, and systems that are needed for this change. So the step one would be to formulate these clear priorities. Remember, priorities, habits, systems. We start at priorities, and this needs to be done at the leadership level. So you want to have some type of statement that is void of being vague. So it needs to be very clear and it needs to be very actionable. So a simple example could be company X will aim to create equitable promotion opportunities for all its employees. So this is a lot more actionable already, and it eliminates a lot of fluff from the challenge that we see. Now, when we have set those priorities, we want to embody the priorities with habits. We want to create behaviors and repeat behaviors and skill behaviors that help the people of this organization get there and achieve this priority. So we come to the habit part of priorities, habit systems. Now, this company can, for example, choose to train all its talent managers or HR reps throughout the company to engage with and prompt all employees that are equitable for promotion, that are high performance or high potential, or that show other signs of being very well in the growth department or in the learning department. People that need to be promoted, that also that exhibit quality, don't just need to step up and get into the HR office to be eligible for promotion. No, we need HR to come to them. So we want HR and we want the talent managers at a company to develop habits of engagement, to develop habits of prompting employees that are high potential to go for that promotion. And in this way, you level the playing field already a little bit. So we want those talent managers to have those habits and to scale and repeat those habits for all people in the organization that show potential for promotion. So this is already starting to shift the playing field, but then we go from habits to systems. Now, we set our priorities. We have trained our HR and our talent managers in new habits, but now we need to make sure that the organizational systems align with those priorities and habits instead of getting in the way of them. So we want the systems to reinforce the habits. And this sounds, again, I know this sounds like a mouthful because it's quite an abstract and high-level framework, but you can make this quite concrete. And a way in which company X can do this is by taking a look at the HR systems and make it so that employees will automatically qualify for a promotion once they have passed a certain threshold. So we all have HR evaluation systems in big organizations, and we all have these problems. And now instead of making people come up to you and making people ask for a promotion, we can tweak the system by having this cutoff score and saying, hey, we noticed that employee A, B, and C have performed so well that they have surpassed this threshold score. They are now automatically eligible for promotion. So what you're doing here is you're performing an intervention on an existing system, and it's just a small tweak, right? Just making sure that you go from opt-in promotion to opt-out promotion. Everyone that is eligible for a promotion will be approached by the HR staff that is now also trained in those engagement and prompting habits. And this will make sure that you create a way more equitable environment in your organization for people to be promoted if they're extrovert, introvert, or anything in between on that spectrum. So this is a good way to apply priorities, habits, systems as a guiding framework for your interventions, and to also bring a strategic objective, like creating an equitable place for all employees, bring that strategic objective into actionable habits, and also to concrete changes to existing systems. So again, this might all sound still a little bit abstract, so we're going to go one step more concrete now. But if you want to apply priorities, habits, systems, and frameworks like that, you want to assure clarity and commitment and prioritize at the leadership level. You want to design and provide training for habits and behaviors. And you want the systems and the processes in your organizations to reinforce those habits. This is what it means to keep priorities, habits, and systems aligned. Now, let's take one more step and make it even more concrete. We're going to go over 3 very handy, practical, and actionable tools that are informed by brain and behavior science. So these come from academia, but are created in such a way that all professionals in the field can apply them. So I like to call these brain-based or evidence-based change management interventions. And these will help you bring along change in your organization, regardless of the scope or size of that change. They will always be handy. The first one is about driving change through storytelling. And it is actually called the public narrative. Now, the public narrative is actually something that some of you might already know because it's been extensively researched by Marshall Gans in the past, but especially in the last couple of decades, it's been made very practical. And what we have found is that if there is any type of change in your organization, you're a change manager, you need to onboard the organization to a new HR system. You need to lead the organization towards a digital transformation. You want to cultivate a culture of inclusiveness or growth mindset. You want this to be backed by a great story because people think in stories. Stakeholders think in stories, not just in facts and numbers and pieces and bits. They want a coherent narrative that helps them make sense of what is going on. And looking at the data, and this is quite incredible, what we've noticed is that a compelling narrative will really change your chances of success. It will mobilize stakeholders to achieve business objectives because they really understand why, the meaning of it. It will also signal that you have an aligned leadership team that is clearly communicating clear and consistently about this, but it is also driving this narrative, that is driving change. Now, we had our friends at McKinsey, of course, conduct a big survey on this with almost 2,000 respondents about transformational change. And what they found was that transformations or changes that had a good narrative, a concrete story that leaders were communicating, these types of changes were 8 times more likely to succeed. And also organizations in which a change narrative was communicated consistently that aligns the organizations around the change and the goals were 3.8 times more likely to succeed. And a really example other finding that they indicated was that stakeholders that feel that they have co-created to the solutions, so also the narrative and the execution, feel 5 times more ownership than stakeholders that are just being told the solution. So you have this ability to tell a great story, to construct a great narrative, and also to involve stakeholders into the creation of this narrative, to help them update it, to help them keep it alive, to help them spread this narrative, tell the message themselves. And this is going to make a significant difference. So it's measurable, 8 times more likely, 3.8 more times likely for a big change to succeed. Now, how do you do this? Well, we like to use a technique or a framework that is called the public narrative. And this will really help you set priorities and communicate them clearly, overcome mental barriers that stakeholders have, and also make sure that all the stakeholders around you have a clear understanding of what your aims are, what you expect from them, and what they can expect from you. If you want to tell this story or craft this narrative, a great tool that you can use is the public narrative technique. And you can combine that with a 3-30-3-30 rule. That is just a way of how long you will make your narrative. So you can make a story 30 minutes long. This will probably be when senior leaders communicate a story or communicate a narrative at formal events. It goes over every element. But you can also create a 3-minute version that fits on a one-pager, or that managers tell at the beginning of a workshop that is connected to this change that you're leading. You can have a 30-second version that each and every stakeholder in the change management group that drives the change knows by heart and can just pitch at the elevator in the water cooler. And you can even scale it down further and have a 3-second version. This will probably be like a motto that drives change. I mean, you see this a lot in the diversity and inclusion culture. Together we create inclusion. Together we drive change. Have this motto that really embodies and carries the message of change. Now, enough about format. Let's talk about content. And this is where the public narrative tool really comes in handy. Now, the public narrative by Marshall Gans consists out of 3 components: the story of self, the story of now, and the story of us. Now, the great thing is these are not mandates. These are not fixed rules. These are merely guidelines that help you craft a story that will drive change. So you can start wherever you want, but in this example, let's take the story of now as a starting point. Now, the story of now is a component to your change narrative that will create urgency. It will help people realize What urgent challenges do we face? What could we achieve if we act now? And also, what do we miss, or what can we not achieve if we don't act now? And also, it makes it very clear, what do we require from you? A leader communicates this, or a manager communicates this, or anyone communicates this and says, this is the urgency and this is what you can do. So this is all about creating positive urgency. And then we move from the story of now to the story of us, or we will move from urgency to unity. And unity is incredibly important because you want something that binds together all these stakeholders that are undergoing a change. So the story of us is where you give meaning to aspects like, how are we in this together? What binds us here? What motivating values do we share? Why would we want this in the first place, right? What drives us to do this? And also, what end goals do we share? And I mean, I think all of you have probably heard of the value of shared goal setting, the value of creating unity and cohesion within a group by stating, these are our shared goals, our shared values, and this is how we are in this together. So make sure to craft this element into your change narrative, because it will make it way more effective in terms of unity. Now we go from the story of us to the story of self. And this is where we go from unity to empathy. Now, this is especially important at the leadership level, because you want empathy to be a driving force. You want the people to empathize with you. Even if you're in a high leadership position, you want to make sure that they know you care about this personally. This is a change that you are driving. This is just that you take responsibility for. So tell them how you will take responsibility, and also tell them what they can expect from you. We see that one of the biggest failures in change is that there is insufficient backing and insufficient buy-in and insufficient support from leadership. So create the story of self on how you as a leader or as a driver or as an agent of change cares about this and will drive this forward. And so we have these three components now, right? We have empathy, unity, and urgency. We have the story of self, the story of us, the story of now. And again, it doesn't matter in which order you integrate this. This is not a mandate. These are merely guidelines. But if you put these elements into a change narrative, it will be very effective. And I forgot to mention, by the way, that the public narrative technique is what is being used by pretty much every president, pretty much every big time CEO, and pretty much every influential figure around the world. All their speechwriters know this because it has been proven to mobilize large groups of people. It's very effective in convincing and persuading through narrative. So to implement this, in short, you want to co-create this and continuously update this story. It's not a fixed thing. You want to invite people into writing the narrative with you. You want to invite people to tell it in their own way. Again, guidelines, not mandates. You want to create empathy, unity, and urgency using this framework. And the way that you do this is all up to you. You can be quite creative with this. And you can use the 33-33 rule to pick the right format for the right context. If you don't have time to do a 30-minute speech, make it 3 minutes. If you don't have time for that, make it 30 seconds, and so forth. The key message is that you use storytelling to reinforce your message here, to reinforce and drive change. Okay, let's go to the second behavioral intervention, the pre-mortem. And this is one that is incredibly popular amongst psychologists that are now in change management. But it's actually a tool that is so easy and that should be known and be applicable to anyone in any organization. A pre-mortem is about identifying and mitigating unseen risks, planning for what you don't know. If you can't predict the future, this is the next best thing. So, as we said before, even the best managers, even the best change agents are prone to planning errors. They can't factor in risks that they haven't seen before, and they don't always speak up to key decision makers. There are all these biases that sneak into the planning process, that sneak into risk assessment, and that sneak into wrapping up for change. That it's a very biased process. But the good thing is you don't have to know all these biases. You don't have to take them out of people's brains. You can do it way more effectively by running a pre-mortem. What is a pre-mortem? It's actually derived from post-mortem, where you look at a situation or a project after it happened and review it, but it's the other way around. So imagine you're in the last meeting before a big change kicks off, before a big transformation project starts running. And the planning is already there. The strategic planners already did everything. The risk department made their risk assessment. The VP is ready to go. You are doing a pre-mortem before we kick off. In this meeting, you divide all the key decision makers into two groups. One group is the black swan group and one group is the white swan group. You tell the black swan group to go 6 months in the future, or a year, or doesn't matter how long your project is, and imagine that the worst thing has happened, the worst outcome has taken place. And you ask them to describe this in detail. What has happened? Where are we? And challenge them to be creative, right? And you do the same thing with the white swan group, but then you're 6 months or a year in the future and everything has went perfectly, exceedingly well. So now these two groups are describing the future states, the worst and best case scenario. This is still fun, but then you ask them to work backwards from that worst or best case scenario to where we are now and create what we like to call a reverse roadmap. So why did we arrive at the worst case scenario? Maybe we didn't allocate too much budget to developers. And in the last month of the project, we have to hire really expensive consultants and we have huge cost overruns. Maybe midway through the project, we notice that risks haven't been properly assessed. And actually, we need 1.5 times more budget to only clear phase one. So by switching around the thinking, by making it retroactive by making it proactive instead of retroactive, you challenge your mind to think in different ways. You're sharpening the brains of the people around you, and this is making them way more invulnerable to biases. So they're way more creative in coming up with why something would have gone wrong, because they go from future to present instead of the other way around. This technique has been proven to work exceedingly well to spot risks, to prepare for risks, and to make sure that the disasters that are not seen are not really happening. Now, the white swan does the same, but then in the best case scenario. And then, of course, you collect the stakeholders, you go around the room, you collect all the information that they have put in there, and you assign follow-up actions. What are we going to do to mitigate these new risks that we have identified now? Who is going to be accountable? Who is going to be responsible? When are we going to check into it? At what cadence? And in this way, you really guard yourself. You really guard yourself towards these risks, towards cost overruns, towards unintended consequences, towards spillover effects that can really mess up a change or a transformation. And again, a pre-mortem is quite simple to do. You can do this in 5 minutes, actually, but I would recommend you, when this is the first time you do it in 30 minutes or you take an hour, and also do it during an existing meeting, right? You can quite easily place this into the agenda. Questions that you ask: what could slow us down before the deadline? What are we nervous about? What did we discover in past projects? How quickly can we respond when something goes horribly wrong? What are our risk areas? So these are all prompting questions that you can use to really get people to think outside of the box, and not from here to then, but from then to here. We trace around the mental frame, and we make people a lot more vigilant towards these biases. Okay. The last intervention, and then it's enough information for today, is if-then plans. And this is about cultivating habits that really stick. So we've already learned about the importance of habits in priorities habit systems. And now we're going to see how we can put that into practice at scale and how to make that very easy and concrete. If-then plans are really easy, almost schematic plans that you can use to communicate what type of behavior you want to see. You make the behaviors very easy and easy to understand, very simple to execute, and also very easy to remember under pressure, under stress, under high emotion. And this is how you can make it a lot easier for people to remember what to do in serious events and when stress hits the fan. So get into it. You can formulate an if-then plan by first creating an if condition. So for example, if you have a problem within an organization, that could be, we want to create a more inclusive onboarding experience. We want our stakeholders to feel more included when they onboard in this company. So we're going to define what behaviors we want to see. So for example, we want employees to speak up, new employees to speak up a lot more, to share their opinion, to really get into it, to really mingle in the organization when we see them in meetings for the first time. So the if condition for the if-then plan would be, if I notice a new employee at the meeting for the first time, then a then condition could be, then I'll invite them to share perspective. I'll invite them to spill their opinion about what they think or to introduce themselves. So if you communicate this clearly as a manager or as a colleague to others, like, hey, we formulated this if-then plan. If we see a new employee at a meeting for the first time, then we'll always invite them to share a perspective. This type of formulation makes it very easy for the brain to create a new habit. If-then is a very logical structure for us to remember things. And that is how you can apply it. So there are many examples that we've also worked with in companies that we've heard our clients come up with or that we created with clients together. For example, if a conversation lasts too long without any progress, then I mention ELMO. And ELMO is an abbreviation for enough, let's move on. And this is an if-then plan that helps speed up things, that helps arouse urgency. But if everyone knows this, if you're in a meeting with your colleagues and everyone is aware of this if-then plan, it's not awkward when someone calls it, hey guys, I noticed that we're going too long with that process. Let's ELMO. So you're building on these set rules, and that's making it a lot easier to direct and also propagate change in behavior. There are many that you can get as creative as you want with these. If all the ideas are going in the same direction, then we'll introduce a sign and brainstorm to get more and different ideas. So again, I would highly recommend you to come up with 1, 2, 3 if-then plans and communicate them to your team and just say like, hey, how about we integrate this into our meetings? And you can also vote on them. A really interesting thing that I saw at one of the companies we work with is that senior executives wrote down an if-then plan that they would want to see in the organization on a big piece of cardboard, and they held it over their heads, and then they were all photographed, and these photos were uploaded to SharePoint or were hung into the lobbies, so that these leaders were communicating the if-then plans that they wanted to see and making it even more memorable. If you see a senior executive with an if-then plan that dictates certain behavior, if you see someone new in a meeting, ask them how they're doing. It could be as simple as you want, but by using this if-then frame, it's going to be so much easier for behaviors to stick. So again, you can apply this very easily. This is, again, these are guidelines, not mandates. The easiest way in which you can apply this is to involve senior leaders or change champions or managers to help role model these if-then plans. Help them, invite them to co-create, invite them to come up with their own if-then plans and to communicate it, to visualize it, to take pictures of if-then plans. Everything is possible. And also create those if-then plans for all the behaviors and habits that you want to activate and reinforce. If you want it to be more complicated, you can make it more complicated, but you can also keep it as simple as you want. And also you can make selections of top 3 if-then plans or top 5 if-then plans for different business activities. We always challenge our clients to have at least 3 if-then plans that they all are aware of and that they use in meetings to make meetings more effective. So again, you can take these evidence-based, these science-backed interventions and apply them wherever you want. The last question that I would like to answer up front, because it is something that we hear all the time from our clients, where do we find time to apply all these new interventions, all these new ideas, techniques, tactics? We're already busy enough as it is. So this is of course understandable, but the great thing is you can still find time to apply this because you can make this as small as possible at the start. So when we look at these if-then plans or pre-mortem, do a pre-mortem that lasts 2 minutes. Integrate 1 if-then plan in a meeting. Start really small and use existing structures and processes. So for example, the team meeting that is already there, you can easily squeeze in a pre-mortem that is just 5 minutes long or something, if it regards an important decision. You can easily just upload a couple of if-then plans to SharePoint and just ask people their opinion. Hey, I came up with these things. Which ones do you like? Shall we implement them? And like that, you're experimenting. So you're taking very small steps and you're finding out what works for you. You identify low-hanging fruit and you see what is measurable, and things that are measurable will give some indication if they work in your case, in your organization or not. I know, what works for Google might not work for you, but what doesn't work for Microsoft might work great for you. It's all about how you experiment with these evidence-based tools. And the more that you do that, the easier it will become to apply it, because that is how habits are formed in the mind. If you do something once, if you do a pre-mortem once, it might feel like a bit of a hassle, but if you do it before every project, or maybe every month routinely, it will feel like less and less work when you go along the way. So start small, build up, show results, and habitualize along the way. And that is how you can find time for the smallest intervals of time to really make a difference with these behaviorally informed interventions. Okay, well, I'm going to stop the recording in a little bit because we've been through quite a lot of information in this evidence-based change webinar. And I'm going to give you all a couple of minutes to think and ask questions. I'll be hanging around here. And for everyone that is tuning in online or is watching this later, we will see you next time with another webinar on a behaviorally informed topic where we'll share tons of science-based tools. And we're always excited to have you here. And feel free to reach out to us with any questions that you have. You can visit us at www.neurofied.com or reach out to me directly. And I hope to see you soon. Goodbye.